Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And I have been reiterating this because it has been a long time coming, but you can now find this show and all of my interviews and appearances finally on iTunes. So if you are into iTunes, if you like to use iTunes, I do. So then you can, of course, subscribe through iTunes. And if you can, please leave me a little review. It helps a lot in terms of search results, and I appreciate all those reviews. And again, if you are unaware and you want to support my work, you can always do that through Patreon. And more importantly, if you want to support all of the good work that is done here at American Freedom Radio, then please do follow the links that I will provide in the show notes for this episode, and you can become a subscriber to American Freedom Radio's Patreon. But anyway, lots of stuff to talk about today. It's Fat Tuesday. For anyone out there who is unaware, it is Fat Tuesday, and I am very excited to be celebrating Fat Tuesday with my very good friend Tom Secker. Tom, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. What are you talking about?
Fat Tuesday? It's the day before Lent. I believe
right. No, we call it something else. Yeah. No, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Fat Tuesday is sort of that's like a Louisiana term for the day before Lent. That's where it derives from. But anyway, okay. That aside, just a few days ago, Sunday, February 26th, marked the 24th anniversary of the World Trade Center 93 bombing. And about 2 weeks before that, on February 18th, or 2 weeks from now, Omar Abdel-Rahman, or AKA the Blind Sheikh, died in prison in North Carolina. And Tom is joining me today to discuss not only the anniversary of WTC 93, but also the death of the Blind Sheikh and what this means for us going forward, what this means for Al-Qaeda as a brand and the history of Al-Qaeda. And we're also probably going to be talking a little bit about how this relates to the current season of Homeland, which has been curiously playing up both WTC 93, but also other aspects and mentioning the Blind Sheikh by name. But before we get into that, I guess I'll just say I was about 5 years old when WTC 93 happened, and at the time my father actually worked across the street from the World Trade Center, and he was there when the bombing took place. And his whole building shook, all of the lights, the power was cut in the building. It was pretty scary. They all had to, evacuate. So that was always a memory that I had growing up. I always remembered that my dad was there, in the 93 bombing. And, Tom, where were you when the World Trade Center was bombed?
Well,
I was spot there.
Yeah, I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I have no recollection of this at the time. It's one of those things that I'm sure it would have been on the news here, but I suppose also at the same time, I mean, I was a few years older than you, but still a pretty young kid and didn't watch the news that much. And at the same time, the early 90s, there was quite a lot of this kind of thing going on in the world. There was certainly a lot going on here. This is when the IRA's mainland campaign was in full swing once more. So it probably just sort of got fudged along with all of that stuff. And I may have seen news about this at the time, but I don't recall it. So I certainly don't remember where I was, probably at school.
Yeah. Well, and that was, as you said, that was a pretty, I don't know, tumultuous time, as you said, in Europe, in terms of the IRA bombings, and there were other bombings, of course, as well. And in those early 90s, it's funny, even when I was as a kid, as I said, I was cognizant of the fact that my father was there, but this was the Oklahoma City bombing was still sort of like in the background. There's the WTC 93. There were other bombings. Just throw out there O.J. Simpson going on. So there was lots of big sort of stories all in the news. And Tom, you are I don't think you'd mind me saying somewhat of an expert on the WTC 93 bombing itself and of some of the very amazing characters that revolve around the bombing plot, and then of course the subsequent plots after that. And this is a very 93 was a very sort of important moment in the myth and the history of Al-Qaeda, and very much in the sort of early planning stages of what Al-Qaeda would become. But before we kind of break all that apart and why it's so important, explain to us a little bit what happened 24 years ago in New York City. What's the official story? What's the kind of the official alternative story? And then what's your theory on all of this? Because I think those are three separate things. But first, what's the official story?
Okay, basically, I guess the official story is a group of radical Islamists of some description, some of whom were veterans of the Soviet Afghan War, took it upon themselves to bomb the World Trade Center. And early one morning, for several months, they were building a truck bomb, a homemade, organic explosive bomb. They load it up into a rented yellow Ryder truck, somewhat familiar to people from students of the OKC bombing. They drive across New York. They go down into the, whatever you would call it, the subterranean parking lot beneath the actual World Trade Center, beneath one of the towers, light the fuses, get the hell out of there, and it blows up. And it killed 6 people, including a pregnant woman, and injured maybe 1,000, strangely. I mean, you could argue, given the amount of damage that was caused and given the building itself, which is completely full of people, it didn't kill that many people, but it wounded an awful lot. This was, while not that fatal a bombing, certainly one that affected an awful lot of people. And, for them, it, certainly lives in their memories. So, yeah, I mean, that's essentially the official story, is that this was a group of essentially self-radicalized. They didn't use that term at the time, but that's what they would now call them. Just a group of disaffected, pissed off radicals who decided to blow up the World Trade Center, and that there isn't much more to it than that.
Right. And it's kind of crazy you're just mentioning the OKC, but yeah, I guess Ryder trucks, for those who don't know, are the preferred brand or the preferred company of terrorists, both foreign and domestic. White nationalists and radical jihadis love the Ryder truck. And as you said, that's sort of the official story. That's it. There's really not much else to look at. I think all of these guys were caught, right? Except for Ramzi Youssef, who of course would go on to, bigger and, brighter things on the horizon. But,
yeah, sure. Well, the way that whole thing came apart was that one of the plotters, a complete idiot called Emad Salem, this is a guy who just periodically did astonishingly stupid and irresponsible things. He kept, setting himself on fire and, accidentally, at one point when him and Ramzi Youssef are driving around in a cart with a bunch of chemicals in the boot for, they're taking this to their place where they're building the bomb, Salem crashes the car and Youssef winds up in hospital. And it's if the police had, searched the car, the whole thing could have been busted there and then. So, yeah, he was a buffoon. And what happens is, after the bombing, he doesn't have an exit plan. He has I think he has a child's airline ticket, with the intention that he's then going to upgrade it to an adult ticket and, get the hell out of Dodge. But he doesn't have the money. So he goes back to the rental company where they rented the truck from, and he says he wants his money back because the truck got stolen. Right?
Yeah.
The guy thinks, hang on, this is a bit shady. He calls up the police contact the FBI. So when Salem goes back a couple of days later to have this argument with the cashier or the manager of the truck rental place and says, how much are you going to give me? You're going to give me, $300. No, I want $500. When you read the transcript of this thing, it is like something from Four Lions. It is like something from a strange comedy that this could ever even happen. And I think actually this is where Chris Morris got quite a lot of his ideas from.
Yeah.
So he's in there arguing with them. They establish, yes, it's him. He's claiming that's his truck, blah, blah, blah. By this point, they've also they've found a scrap of this vehicle in the wreckage and the rubble at the World Trade Center, and it's got like an identification number on it, so they know that this is the truck. They swoop in and arrest him. And a few days later, they swoop in and arrest 3 or 4 others who were essentially the central gang that carried out the bombing. And they're all put on trial and convicted. But yeah, Ramzi Youssef gets away with it completely. He flies out that evening to Pakistan and disappears.
Just a quick little note on that. I mean, who was training this guy, this idiot? Why did he think this was? Because I mean, wasn't Ali Muhammad the great triple agent was training at least some of these guys? Did he miss this guy when they were, going through the basics of being a terrorist? Why go back to the truck rental place? You would think, you just disappear. Even if it's just in New York, lay low. They've just, right, as you said, 1,000 people have been injured in what at that point was one of the biggest terrorist attacks, I guess, since Oklahoma City. But certainly the biggest terrorist attack in New York or anything on that level. And this guy's going back to the Ryder truck rental place?
Well, I mean, there were some big terrorist incidents in America in the 60s and 70s, back in the early days of very popular airline transport, when, in America you could get an airline ticket as cheaply as you could get a bus or something. There was a lot more planes, a lot more people on the planes, a lot laxer security, and there was quite a lot of people blowing up planes and killing dozens, if not hundreds of people. But no, I mean, in terms of I suppose urban terrorism, like something like that, a big shooting or a big bombing right in the heart of a city, there wasn't much of that in America before this. So why didn't he lay low? Or I don't know, honestly. I think he was just a complete idiot. I mean, you're right. Ali Muhammad was training pretty much all of the people who were passing through this mosque and were part of this network. But at the same time, you'll find idiots in the military who somehow scrape through the training and everyone just sort of tolerates them even though they know this person is a liability. You'll find that in lots of organizations. So it's not that surprising that you would find it in a terrorist gang, I guess.
No, and I think it also just illustrates that, the government fucks up too. Not every one of their plots totally goes off without a hitch. And I think there's also a level, to a level it's about at times recruiting idiots just for that reason. Is that they are idiots, that you can kind of convince them that this is a totally great, I don't know, maybe they wanted, him to get, caught or something, like that. Tom, what's the kind of official alternative theory or the official conspiracy theory as to what happened? Because this revolves mostly around Emad Salem and the FBI. And how does that theory factor into the World Trade Center bombing in 93?
Well, okay, let me clarify something. The explanation that I just gave as the official explanation is basically what you'll find in the 9/11 Commission. You also have a bunch of relatively mainstream books and some government reports and things that say, no, this was actually an Al-Qaeda plot, that this was part of something bigger, So that would be, like, if you like, the more conspiracy theory mainstream version of this bombing. So there's those two somewhat different interpretations. Then you get into the whole Emad Salem thing, which is like, this is the one that has been focused on by most of the alternative media. Emad Salem was a former Egyptian army officer who moved to New York in the 1980s. He offered his services to the FBI, and they had him spying on Russian gangs and stuff like that. But he says, no, there's something much more serious that you need to know about, that you need an informant in. And he tells him about this mosque, the Al-Khifa Refugee Center, the Al-Farooq Mosque in Brooklyn, and says this is now being run by an extreme radical from Egypt, the Blind Sheikh, who you mentioned at the top of the show. And he says, you need someone inside there. I can infiltrate that group for you. So the FBI go, please, go right ahead. And so he's spying on them from sometime in 1991 through to the summer of 1992, when he is mysteriously fired by the FBI, and we don't really know why this is. The problem is, after the bombing, the FBI go back to him and say, okay, we need you to go back into the mosque and re-infiltrate these guys and find out what the hell happened and what's going on here. And he says, yeah, but last time you were paying me nothing and screwing me over, and said, if you want me to testify and you want me to wear a wire, you have to pay me $1.5 million is what they ended up paying him. So he goes back in. He re-infiltrates this mosque. He gets close to the Blind Sheikh. He gets him on tape saying all kinds of incriminating things, but mostly at Salem's provocation. At this point, he's very much acting as a agent provocateur or an entrapment agent. He also encourages the other guys, the remnants of the gang that were sort of more on the fringes of the World Trade Center bombing plot, and says, we've got to follow up with something. We've got to, blow up some bridges and some tunnels and courthouses and, Jewish centers and temples and, all sorts of stuff. They would, anything that would, cause a big fuck up, basically. And he helps them find a warehouse. He helps them get some chemicals to start mixing more explosives. I think the FBI were actually at this point filming this inside this warehouse, or at least taking photographs. So they knew exactly what was going on. They knew exactly how far the plot had progressed. They just waited until it got to the point where it'd be a slam dunk in court. They swoop in and arrest the whole lot, including the Blind Sheikh at this point. They then, so we've got two groups of people. We've got the original bombers who were arrested shortly after the bombing. Then we have this lot who were arrested several months later. I think where people get confused is in listening. Salem was not just recording his conversations with the Blind Sheikh and the rest of the people in the mosque. He was recording his conversations with his FBI handlers, because this guy, didn't really trust them.
As well, he shouldn't,
Yeah, who can blame him? And some excerpts of these tapes were played in court during the trial. And so the defense lawyer was trying to say, look, this guy was a government entrapment agent. He's the one saying, we should blow up the Brooklyn Bridge. I think that's a good target. I think, we need a couple of truck bombs at either end of the bridge, blah, blah, blah. And the other guys go, I think that's a good idea. And because they're going, I think that's a good idea, bang, conspiracy to commit terrorism. So he does at one point suggest we could give them fake explosives that wouldn't go off, let them go and do it, and then, that's still conspiracy to commit terrorism. But the FBI don't go for this. Where this all gets confused is people think that is a conversation that took place before the World Trade Center bombing, when it wasn't. It's a conversation that's taking place weeks, if not months afterwards. Do you want to?
I'm sorry. And of course the presumption there is that the FBI gave them actual explosives, and that's what took place. That's what caused the World Trade Center bombing. And I've seen that over and over again. Obviously, people that sort of 93 seems so long ago, we don't hear it that often. But if you search out on online or in all media sites, you'll see that the idea that Emad Salem was basically given real explosives by the FBI, and then boom, the World Trade Center is bombed. And just to clarify, that's not what actually happened. And
No.
right. And this is sort of, again, as you said, this has sort of been construed as being the sort of official conspiracy theory, that this was really kind of the FBI, I don't know, I guess the operation, this is one thing, and then we'll maybe move on to your theory on this. I've never really seen fully explained is how that would even happen, how the FBI accidentally gives them real explosives, or they give them real, you know what I mean? That's never really been fully explained to me. I guess the presumption here is that, plausible deniability, we thought they were fake, oh, whoops, they were real. But again, it never even happened like that.
Well, no, and that wouldn't be the way around that you do it. Explosives are, for one thing, easy enough to make or easy enough to steal, or even, in a lot of cases, easy enough to just buy. If you need your terrorists, your patsy terrorists, to actually get some real explosives and blow something up for real, you just put them in touch with an arms dealer and give them 50 grand. You don't piss about with
fake
give
bombs
them
from
bags
the FBI.
of sugar or That's not the way you go about these things, to be honest. I've studied dozens of these sorts of things, so I've never come across that kind of idea before or since. So I don't find it plausible.
Absolutely. Now, what's your sort of theory on this, or your take on this? Because of, and again, Tom and I we're not going to be able to get through all of the details of this, and we want to cover some other stuff in today's episode. So if people are interested in a much more in-depth look at all of this, we're going to link up to a great episode that Tom did with Ed Opperman on the Opperman Report, where you spent a full 2 hours dissecting this whole case. And we'll also link up to a really great, I guess maybe like a document dump that you have on the 93 bombing, which faithful listeners will remember from investigatingtheterror.com, which is did you still run the site, Tom?
Yeah, the site's still up. I don't post anything new there, but everything's still on there. So yeah.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. So we'll link up to that as well, which is invaluable reading, and you've also you do some writing in that document dump and kind of laying out all of this stuff. But what's your kind of take on what may have actually happened? And because again, as I said, the theory that's very popular is that the FBI was sort of in charge of this whole operation, whereas almost always when you really start peeling back on big events like this involving deep politics, like for instance the Oklahoma City bombing, very easy on the surface to say this was a sort of the FBI and the ATF kind of working together, and they probably were, and they were definitely a big factor in that. But when you peel back in OKC and you start to see, what's PatCon? Why is the CIA involved in riling up ultra-nationalists and the Patriot movement, and why do they have satellites spying on all these people? And, and in the 93 bombing, the CIA is also kind of in the background. So explain a little bit about that.
Well, and with OKC, you've got the whole problem of who the hell was Timothy McVeigh?
Exactly.
He seems to be military intelligence.
Which is almost always, CIA as well.
Well, or you think, is this some kind of crossover between, Pentagon and CIA? Black Ops have somehow concocted this thing together, and McVeigh was their best bet. So that's who McVeigh ended up being, if you like. But with WTC 93, the real problem is, why was Salem sacked like 6-7 months before the bombing? No one really knows the answer to this, and I think it's because the FBI got too close to a probable CIA operation. Because when Salem's original handler was a woman called Nancy Floyd, who worked in the FBI field office in New York, but when he started working the counterterrorism beat, if you like, he gets handed over to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. So he has an FBI guy and an NYPD guy, which was John Antichev from the Bureau and Lou Napoli of the police. He doesn't really like these guys. He always trusted Nancy Floyd, and actually for most of the time when he was spying on the Blind Sheikh, he was actually still reporting to Nancy Floyd. She was the one going out and meeting him at 2 a.m. to find out what heard or whatever. So after the bombing, she starts poking into this. She starts raising a bit of a shitstorm at Bureau, saying, why did we sack this guy? Haven't we just, completely bungled this in an unforgivably bad manner that's resulted in a bunch of deaths and loads of people injured and all kinds of chaos? So they start leaking stories to the press saying that she was sleeping with him, that she was having an affair with Salem. They also subject her to a internal affairs investigation, professional standards investigation or whatever. And they move her off to another office and basically screw her career. Why? She was right, for one thing. And also, you could say the FBI looked bad in that instance, but the worst thing you could accuse them of is not realizing the significance of all of this and bungling it.
So, incompetence. An intelligence failure.
Yeah. That's the sort of thing people are relatively accustomed to. So why did this cause such a problem? Why did they destroy this woman's career over it? I can only assume deep politics of some sort. There's something more going on in that decision, in that string of decisions in the Joint Terrorism Task Force and in the FBI. And then when you look into the background of this mosque, you find out, okay, in the 1980s, this was being run basically as a recruiting hub for young Muslim men to send them out to Afghanistan to go and fight in the jihad against the Soviets as part of this massive multi-billion-dollar CIA operation that no one knew about, but kind of everyone knew about. So that's what it was in 1985, 6, 7, 8. During that time, the Blind Sheikh starts turning up at this mosque. He starts making visits to the US on a series of different visas and multiple entry visas and so on, all of which are being processed for him by CIA officials posing as consular officials in the embassy in Cairo. This isn't in dispute anymore. This isn't in any way in dispute. So you have to think, at that point, that's a CIA asset being involved in a CIA recruiting hub as part of a CIA operation, right? There's no other way of interpreting it. So then what happens? The jihad in Afghanistan comes to an end, but the Blind Sheikh moves to New York permanently on another CIA visa. And that's when things start going a bit crazy, because I can't remember exactly how long it would have been, but it's in late 1991. El Sayed Nozair, who we mentioned a few weeks back, guns down Rabbi Meir Kahane, this fundamentalist rabbi of sorts. And this is like the first blood spilled, the first strike in the jihad in New York, or whatever you want to call it. And Nozair was a follower of the Blind Sheikh. He was an attendee at this mosque. He was trained by Ali Mohammed, who was gotta be CIA.
Who was also at the mosque as well, correct?
Yeah, regularly. He was conducting training sessions in the back rooms of this mosque and refugee center. And he was doing this while he was serving at Fort Bragg in the Special Forces in the mid to late 80s, and continuing after that when he's still in the Special Forces Reserve. So this whole time he's still military intelligence, CIA, both.
Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, exactly. Shortly after Nozair kills Kahane, he is arrested, but nothing else. There's no other further investigation into the mosque. No one's wondering, well, who is this guy? Who's his background? Who does he hang around with? Who might have provoked him into doing this? Who might have trained him and given him the gun? You know? Even when they bust up his apartment, I've read the FBI 302 of what they found in Nozair's apartment, and it's everything from radical Islamic rantings to bomb-making manuals to special forces stuff from Fort Bragg, lots of boxes of ammunition.
Yeah.
The sort of thing where you'd think, this might be more than just one guy, you know.
Yeah, right,
He's got like a flat that could basically be used for a small campaign of urban warfare. Do you not think we might want to poke into who he's associating with and what the hell's going on? No.
Where he got this?
Yeah, where did he get all this stuff from? Anyway, so they don't really investigate that. A couple of months later, the emir at the mosque, who's been running it for several years by this point, a guy called Mustafa Shalabi, he is murdered, presumably by followers of the Blind Sheikh, because the Blind Sheikh then completely takes over. There is no real investigation into Shalabi's murder. No one is actually... I think a couple of people were arrested, but then let go. But that's it. No one's actually charged or prosecuted in this. It's basically an unsolved crime still. So the Blind Sheikh then takes over the mosque completely. And at this point, I think the State Department actually revoked his visa, right? But nothing happens to him for another 2.5 years. He's not deported. He's not he's not got to go to some immigration.
No, he's just sort of in the wind at that point.
Yeah, he's just sort of hanging out at the mosque with his group of followers who go on to bomb the World Trade Center. But no one gives a crap. No one does anything. Why? It just seems like something's protecting that guy, and something's protecting what's going on at that mosque. At every point when there was a reason to investigate further, or there was a reason to go in there and arrest someone, or at least demand that they turn up to some kind of immigration and asylum hearing, nothing happens. For years this is going on for several years this is going on. And that just says to me, CIA operation. And then, the joke of it, the absolute joke of it, after the Blind Sheikh is eventually arrested in the summer of 1993, and the government now plans to put him on trial for seditious conspiracy, which is basically a conspiracy to try and overthrow the government.
Right.
Isn't what
that was going to happen.
Yeah, as if that was going to happen, and that wasn't really what they were trying to do. But whatever. Even at that point, the State Department, their Office of the Inspector General, conducts an internal investigation. They say, hang on, this guy who got all these different visas and seemed to just sort of be hanging around in this country without any problem, why did he get those visas in the first place? We have to inspect this and look into whether this decision was right and blah, blah, blah. So they have to go and look at the records from Cairo. Why did he get the visas? Were his applications in order? Blah, blah, blah. What background checks were done? All of that kind of stuff. But as far as I can tell from the documents that are now available about this investigation, the State Department never actually saw those files, and they never actually spoke to the CIA posing as consular officials who actually granted the visas. So they concluded, can't really say anything. We don't really know. Can't say one way or another whether this was the right decision. And it's like, this guy's followers have murdered multiple people of, different, from two different religions of quite major significance. You're talking about people who are going to be missed. They've bombed the World Trade Center. They've conducted this massive plot to blow up a bunch of bridges and tunnels and landmarks and the Statue of Liberty and blah, blah, blah. And you still can't conclude it was wrong to grant this guy these visas. Again, this speaks to pressure from a more powerful entity. And this is the State Department. This isn't some piddling little authority. The only people who gazump the State Department when it comes to visa issues and national security is the CIA. So every time, you know what I mean? There's a pattern here. There's institutional pressures being applied on a bunch of different agencies to scuttle investigations or withhold information that every time points to the agency.
Absolutely. And that's something that again, as you point out, when you're talking about the FBI going after people, destroying a fellow agent's life because she dared to question what was going on with her own informant, and then you start looking at with this, and the State Department doesn't really have an answer. There's only one other possibility there, that's the CIA is behind all. And again, to the Al-Farooq Mosque, the Al-Khifa Refugee Center, if you haven't looked into it, look into it. And there's another little personal aside. At the mosque I've passed many, many, many times as a kid on Atlantic Avenue. And as a kid, it's just a mosque. Atlantic Avenue is a very large Arab population. lots of Syrians, lots of Yemenis, lots of Egyptians. But it's a fascinating little chapter. And again, it's like, it's one of the building blocks of this whole, Al-Qaeda operation. And as you say, always a CIA operation. I mean, they were sending money to the Bosnians. I've heard, I don't know if you ever heard of this, Tom. I've seen it online that like Zawahiri was alleged to have spoken there once, that he was ferried into the U.S. and spoke at the Al-Farooq Mosque. Have you ever seen that before?
Not that specifically, but I know Zawahiri, certainly throughout the late 80s and early 90s, Ali Mohammed was smuggling him into the United States and helping him travel around and raise money and, you know, talk his stuff and garner recruits and all the rest of it. And a lot of this, the Al-Farooq Mosque was also being used to recruit people to go and fight in the war in Bosnia, which was a Pentagon Black Ops, MI6, CIA policy at that point in time. So this is the whole point, that this happened very shortly after the end of the Soviet Afghan War, and therefore very shortly after the end of Operation Cyclone. There's only really about 3 years between the two, 3 or 4 years. So naturally, some people, some very good journalists, the CIA's own Inspector General has suggested that this was somehow a CIA screw-up. That, you know, they kind of funded and trained these guys, and sooner or later one of them came over here and blew something up, kind of thing. Well, a bunch of them did, whatever. But the point is, the policy didn't stop. The policy of using jihadis did not stop in 1989. It continued, and most obviously in Bosnia. This covert policy of using these people as kind of, certainly in the Balkans wars, it's notorious if you read books about this. They were notoriously used as like special forces, as shock troops, because they were willing to die, because they were radicals. They thought they were going to heaven and all of that. So they were very, very effective soldiers, if you're fighting a dirty war, that is. So this policy never stopped. So you have to consider that the whole time that the Blind Sheikh was there, he was there on CIA orders. Everything he was doing was part of black operations. So therefore, he's either the most unwitting, accidentally useful person in the world, or he's a CIA asset following orders. And if he's doing that, why not the World Trade Center bombing as well?
On that note, Tom, do you think the Blind Sheikh was aware of who his paymasters were? Or maybe just had ideas. You know, that's always a question. When you look at someone like Ali Mohammed, he knew exactly what was going on, and he had no qualms about it. And he seems like the type of guy that was definitely game to do this. But what about a character like the Blind Sheikh? Do you think he fully understood that he was that he was helping to brainwash Muslim men to kill themselves, in the name of course, protecting and fighting the evil West? What do you think the Blind Sheikh thought?
He strikes me as something of an ideologue. And one thing you notice about ideologues is they're very, very good at ignoring things that would otherwise make them hypocrites. It doesn't really matter what the ideology is. It seems, from my experience, if you've got a kind of true believer in something, they're quite happy to work with their enemy and overlook the fact that they're working with their enemy and convince themselves it's, for the higher cause, it's for the greater good or whatever. So therefore, I think it was something, with him it was probably something like that. I think you're right. With Ali Mohammed, he just strikes me as kind of like a spy through and through.
Exactly. Yeah, he was born a spook. There was no...
And it seems he was doing this for the best part of 20 years, so you can't think, he can't have been doing that with some kind of massive delusion or just some useful idiocy. He's much more than that. Whereas, the Blind Sheikh's talent in this, I mean, let's not forget the guy was blind. He's not going to be out there building bombs or shooting anyone. His talent was in getting inside people's minds and getting them to do things and radicalizing them. That was his talent. So someone like that, as long as they can do that, and as long as they can have influence on world events by doing that, they'll probably team up with pretty much anyone. I reckon. That's my, yeah.
No, it just thinking about it again, that he's blind. That reminds me of the leader of Shuriken, the Japanese cult, and he was of course a blind cult leader and a yoga master, who obviously he wasn't being controlled by intelligence or not that I know of anything like that. Although there's weird sort of Russian military influence in some of how Shuriken got the gas and stuff. But again, just of having power over people, that's an aphrodisiac in and of itself. So perhaps again with the Blind Sheikh, just having power over people, being able to manipulate people for his own political goals or for his own ideological goals, that might just be enough. If you find someone that's that hardcore about it, then yeah, I guess, working with the CIA, could be doing worse, right? And obviously he was protected for many, many years.
Well, it would seem so. And also you've got to wonder, the guy's been in prison since mid-1993 and he's died recently, so that's the best part of 24 years. Why hasn't he said anything? Why has Ramzi Youssef not said anything? And I think the answer is they know it could be worse. They know that if someone can do that to them and they wind up in prison with 200-year prison sentences and they know they're going to die in jail at some point, they also know I could be horribly killed in jail because I'm in a supermax prison full of sociopaths and serial killers. And that maybe if I keep my mouth shut, I might at least be able to live out my years in some kind of peace.
Yes.
And at that point, that's the only two options you have. Well, you can kill yourself, someone else can kill you, you can live out your years and die of natural causes however many decades later. Those are your three options. And so the fourth option of I'm going to blab about my time with the CIA, who's going to listen? What difference is it going to make? So I think that's probably
you think that message is going to get out of prison? I mean, I
don't know. I have read some of Ramzi Youssef's handwritten legal appeals and what have you, because he's spent most of his time since he's been locked up filing various administrative orders to try and get different parts of his sentence changed so that he can actually talk to other people and not just be in solitary confinement all the time, or has access to more books and blah, blah, blah. That seems to be what he's spending his time doing these days. Though apparently he did also convert to Christianity. I remember reading that. I don't know if it's true, but it was quite widely reported. So
that sounds like some sort of little piece of propaganda, put out by the CIA. Even this guy, the hardcore, to just as a fuck you to jihadis or something.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, Tom, we're coming up towards the break, and we're definitely going to chat a little bit in the second hour. But how does this sort of all fit into the Al-Qaeda narrative? How is this all sort of fit into the larger story? Because again, this is bizarrely, in my opinion, a kind of rarely looked at part of this whole history of Al-Qaeda. A lot of people love to kind of focus on the 9/11 stuff, and now ISIS and this, that, and the Muslim Brotherhood. But this time in New York, very important. As I said, as building blocks towards creating this much larger network. Again, keep in mind, Ramzi Youssef is the nephew of KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, one of the, he's one of the big dogs, and definitely, very high up in the hierarchy, and he had to know what was going on to some degree. So how does this all sort of fit together? And what does this sort of, show us about how Al-Qaeda was sort of built up? Because it's funny to see again, now it's become very, I don't know, Sheik in the media to talk about the FBI entrapping young Muslims, and they're doing it at a pace that is crazy. I mean, it far outdoes anything they've done before. But as you see, back in 1993, they were doing the same thing. All of these sort of tactics are exactly the same. Nothing has really changed. It's only gotten worse. So talk a little bit about this time period and how it fits into the larger narrative.
Well, like I said earlier, you do have this 9/11 Commission version, which is that this was a disparate group of jihadis, some of which had fought in the Soviet Afghan War. Then you have a whole bunch of relatively mainstream accounts that criticize this simplified version. And they're right, it is simplified, but their version is equally simplified. And that is that this was the first shot fired by Al-Qaeda, and that the Blind Sheikh, they point to things like the Blind Sheikh, part of his legal defense fund was paid by Osama bin Laden. This does appear to be true. When Ramzi Youssef was eventually caught up with 2 years later, he's at a guest house in Peshawar, I think, that is run by Osama bin Laden. This was part of the network by which young men were funneled through into Afghanistan. So people point to these things and they say WTC 93 was an Al-Qaeda job. And it sort of was. But at the same time, Ramzi Youssef never met bin Laden. He didn't know him personally. He knew Ali Mohammed, he knew the Blind Sheikh, he knew a bunch of other people, but it seems he never actually met bin Laden himself. So it's not like bin Laden ordered this, but people have theorized that. I've seen absolutely no evidence of this. But in amongst all of this back and forth and the different interpretations and different scholars and journalists who've, argued over the minutiae of this to try and carve out their own particular version, the underlying narrative is that this is Al-Qaeda round one, if you like. And then you get, because at least for a few years, most accounts never went back further than the embassy bombings in 98.
Right.
Curiously, Ali Mohammed's last big operation. So the narratives only go back that far. They don't go back into, well, what the hell was Ali Mohammed doing for the previous 10 years? What the hell else was going on? So you do get this idea that I think this was more important after 9/11 than it was before. I don't think beforehand anyone really associated Al-Qaeda with the World Trade Center bombing, or not very much. I think, though, after 9/11, or at least a few years later, it very much became part of the backstory. Like I hate to use a Hollywood term, but it's kind of appropriate, the origin story for 9/11.
Yeah.
This was the first time they tried to take down the World Trade Center, and then they, came back years later and did it again, kind of thing. And, okay, that's pathetic and simplified, but that kind of guttural, basic narrative is effective. People believe it. And in the commentariat, the intelligentsia, this is what I think most of them seem to believe about this. So, at least for that part of society, it was very important at creating this Al-Qaeda narrative, at giving them a story where, they started small, just a truck bomb in the basement, and then years later they came back with planes, kind of thing.
It sells newspapers. It's a good story, too.
It is kind of a good story, in a horrible way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In a horrific sort of a sense. But it's a good story. It works well. And again, too, when you see Ramzi Youssef in 93, and then he's the quote mastermind of that plot, and then you see his uncle being the quote mastermind of 9/11. That's wonderful. That's great. That's that's just it sells newspapers. It makes a great sort of headline for Fox News and things like of that nature. And it's funny too, the idea of that there may not be like a tangible link between, say, the Al-Qaeda hierarchy when you get like a bin Laden or Zawahiri and what happened in 93, but obviously it's all there. Because, or at least the common thread in so much of it is the Al-Farooq Mosque, the Blind Sheikh, Ali Mohammed. These guys are all kind of know one another. They're all working together.
And you could always argue, to be honest, the Blind Sheikh and Ali Mohammed are more important to Al-Qaeda than bin Laden ever was.
Yeah, exactly.
If you take a certain point of view of it, so you could argue this was in fact a completely an Al-Qaeda operation, but we just have to completely redefine what we mean as Al-Qaeda. So, yeah.
Right, no, exactly. And I don't know, I mean, there's so many little bit, threads and things that I want to get to. So again, if people are, interested in exploring this a bit more, definitely check out the, show that Tom did with Ed on this, and also, all of the documents and stuff that, Tom has accumulated, dealing with, World Trade Center, 93. Just before we get to the break, we are going to continue, for a little bit. I'll try and beg Tom to stay on as long as possible. And, you know, we're going to be talking about Homeland, which seems to be kind of playing up on this quite a bit. But, Tom, what do you make of the fact that this is just sort of like a forgotten chapter in the history of Al-Qaeda, why it's not talked about in the media? I mean, even the mainstream media hardly covered this at all. I mean, there were a few New York, based papers and things that mentioned the anniversary. Maybe on the 25th, there'll be a bigger, it'll be a bigger deal, but what do you make of that people aren't really kind of focused on this anymore?
Well, I mean, you're right. Even on the 20th anniversary, and I wrote an article all about this, and that's when I released that document collection that I'd been working on for, to be honest, years, gathering all of that stuff by that point. Even then, there wasn't a huge amount of coverage. In the run-up to the 20th anniversary, that's when we got these bizarre stories about Ramzi Youssef converting to Christianity. But I didn't see even much coverage then. And you got to think, even 9/11 has now faded from the media agenda. It's not like they won't mention it on the next anniversary, but it won't be like it was 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. So these things do eventually drop off. I don't know exactly why. You know, there's a million different reasons why. As to why, I mean, I mean, you're right. Why isn't this something that's been more examined? Because you really have to read some excellent investigative journalistic work to get all of the different stuff that was going on there and try and figure out what the hell actually happened. It took me years of reading lots of books and lots of documents and lots of court transcripts and other stuff. I can only assume, again, it's partly because they kind of wanted this to happen. Someone within the CIA, I guess we're saying, wanted this to happen, but they didn't want this to be like a crossing the Rubicon moment. A paradigm shift like 9/11 was. So I think because it was just about sort of sowing a few seeds, laying down a few early blocks of this narrative that would become the war on terror against Al-Qaeda, it's sort of like, it's like an echo of what we were just saying, that, you know, there was institutional pressure on all aspects of the investigation around this mosque. And I think to a certain extent afterwards, there must have been some kind of institutional pressure to only cover this so much and so often that indeed, by the fact of the FBI and the CIA not leaking lots of stuff to the press, it kind of means they don't have a huge amount to go on. I mean, what do? Just recycle the same story they wrote last year? Even some journalists won't do that. So, you see what I mean? It just sort of echoes what was actually happening in the operation itself.
I think you made a great point there too, with the sense that they want to put this out there. They want this to become a meme that society picks up on. The idea of radical jihadis hell bent on destroying us, but they don't want us to go any farther beyond that. Well, we are at the break right now. We will be returning to discuss how all this fits into the current season of Homeland with my guest Tom Secker.
I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me. American Freedom Radio. Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys because they have all the technology. They have all these great things that they're going to do. But obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Did you know there are 3 million edible food plants on Earth, and none have the nutritional value of the hemp plant? HempUSA.org offers you hemp protein powder. It does not contain chemicals or THC, is non-GMO, and is 100% gluten-free. Hemp protein powder burns fat, builds muscle, contains 53% protein, and feeds the body the nutrients it needs. Call 888-910-4367 and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org. HempUSA.org introduces 3 brand new detox formulations of micro plant powder. Brain Fuel for depression, bipolar disorders, and stress. Total Care, anti-cancer agent that cleans the liver and organs and increases memory. Rejuvenate, invigorates and heals the body, mind, and spirit. These products are your alternative to pharmaceuticals. Call 888-910-4367 and like us on Facebook. We ship worldwide. Only at HempUSA.org.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
What about show business? Show business, completely dishonest, corrupt, and full of shit, but in a nice way. Plenty of expensive drugs and perverted sex. If you're going to be full of shit, might as well enjoy your work. Then you have the media, not just the news media, let's include them all. The media are almost literally exploding with bullshit because they're located right at the crossroads of all the other bullshit. The media are made up of equal parts advertising, politics, business, public relations, and show business. These people are sitting right at bullshit junction. There's enough bullshit in the media for Texas to open a branch office. And you still have enough left over to start 2 law firms and a Christian bookstore.
What has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Provide us with free education?
Well, that's obviously effective, but apart from reversing the dumbing down of America...
All the information they provide is free?
What about the free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, man?
Exploiting commonplace corruption?
They help vulnerable people who don't have a voice?
Bringing light to important information nobody else does.
Or they never censor, hang up, or cut off their guests? Well, that's no fun, is it?
Oh, they created a fantastic alternative media source during an era of bad, manipulative, and infiltrated mainstream and alternative media shows and scum.
Okay, well, apart from the free education, free information, free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, exposing commonplace corruption, helping vulnerable people without a voice, bringing light to important information nobody else does, and creating a fantastic commercial-free alternative media source in a sea of bad, manipulative mainstream and alternative media shills and scum, what has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Donate to American Freedom Radio today.
No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, no fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio, American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are just joining me right now in the second hour, we are still joined by my good friend Tom Secker, and we were discussing in the first hour the 24th anniversary of the World Trade Center 1993 bombing, as well as the death of Omar Abdel-Rahman, aka the Blind Sheikh, and the sort of the history of Al-Qaeda, how this all fits into the larger, of course, war on terror that we've all known to come to love. But we also wanted to kind of talk about the current season of Homeland. We of course did an episode a few weeks back for the first episode, and I think we'll be doing another one soon as we get maybe towards like the 6th or we've already done the 6th episode, right? So maybe like 7th or 8th. We'll do another one, and then we'll do like an episode sort of recapping the whole season. But as we mentioned in the first episode, they actually one of the main characters, Seku, mentions the Blind Sheikh, just openly mentions the assassination of Meir Kahane. There's multiple references to the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, as well as some of the other notable bombing attempts in New York. The series takes place in New York, and there are lots and lots of kind of creepy parallels to what was going on in the mid to early 90s and what's going on in this season of Homeland. So we've got obviously the verbal mentions of things like the Blind Sheikh, 93 bombing, Meir Kahane, but we've also got one of the late character, I guess, the late great Seku, who dies in the 2 episodes back. He is driving around in a van, sort of reminiscent of a Ryder truck, when a bomb goes off. He is, of course, this, he's portrayed as some sort of a terrorist, although I guess he really wasn't. He was just sort of I don't know, just like an angry guy, I suppose.
A bit mouthy on the internet, yeah?
Yeah, a bit mouthy on the internet, exactly, yeah. And he is, of course, arrested by the FBI through the use of a paid informant. And then he's kind of let go through a series of events by the FBI, although they were obviously pressured into doing this by Kerry. There's a whole other story behind that I don't know if we'll be able to get into. And then this bombing takes place. So very much hearkening to the Emad Salem FBI story that Tom was talking about in the first hour. And there are some other things as well, but Tom, it does seem that they are fairly blatant in making these references. So what the hell do you think is going on with Homeland? Because again, we can assume that this is sort of what the CIA wants to be put out there. So what do you make of these overt references to the 93 bombing?
Well, you're right. We can only assume this has been in some way encouraged, vetted, I don't know quite how to describe it, but approved by the powers that be. Because I certainly haven't seen any reports that their meetings in Georgetown with State Department and White House and CIA people have stopped. So the producers are presumably still doing that, and that whole process is still going on. It would be very strange for them to kind of pull out of Homeland now, wouldn't it? Having invested so much time and effort into making this show what it is. Okay, so we've got this guy, Seku, who in the first episode, he is arrested by the FBI because he's been set up by an informant, essentially entrapped, it turns out. We then have someone... okay, now let's get into it. Carrie goes to a guy she knows at the NSA and asks him, I need this phone call between the FBI handler and the informant. And the guy goes away, and then the recording turns up. Carrie assumes it's come from her guy. She goes to the FBI and says, look, you were clearly setting him up. This recording proves it, kind of like in the World Trade Center trial. And they let him go. And then a couple of days later, Secker is driving this van. He's at his delivery job. And actually, even the warehouse that he goes to pick up the van is very reminiscent of the lockup that Ramzi Youssef used where he stored all the chemicals and gas bottles and things that he used to build this bomb. There's a lot of parallels, let alone just a simple scenario, a truck bombing in New York.
Exactly.
That
in and of itself.
93. So, yeah, it's a tricky one because it's clear that Secker didn't know he was driving a bomb. That isn't what World Trade Center. But you could say that's kind of a parallel or a metaphor that they're saying those guys didn't know what they were really doing. They knew to go and blow something up, but they didn't know why. They didn't know what the grander plan was here. Just like Secker didn't know. So he's an unwitting suicide bomber, effectively, that gets painted as a suicide bomber. So there's sort of maybe shades of 9/11 there as well.
Well, you know what I found even more kind of terrifying and scary is that we find out that there is this guy across the street from Carrie's house who is in fact spying on Carrie and who is also the one or is involved in this bombing. Secker is not used as a patsy by some Al-Qaeda or Islamic State proxy in New York. It is a private intelligence firm. This is what we can kind of piece together. A private intelligence firm contracted out by the CIA, in this case Dara Dahl, our favorite character, to plant this bomb in the car. There's even weird kind of like his Secker's other friends who work at this delivery company also seem to be kind of perhaps involved in this, or they definitely know that there's more going on than meets the eye.
When he gets back to work, they're like making jokes that, oh, you made a deal with the government, you're an informant now, and all of this, which is, that's an odd thing for people to be saying. Who the
fuck would say that? Yeah.
Who jokes to their friend that they're an FBI informant, particularly after they've just been arrested?
Right. It's like if you thought they were an FBI informant, I would just keep my mouth shut.
Yeah, just make sure you don't say anything around them anytime soon. Yeah. So that there is something odd going on at that distribution warehouse, certainly. And you're right, this guy seems to work, as far as we can tell, for a private intelligence firm that are somehow, I mean, we're guessing Dara Dahl is behind this bombing, but we don't really know yet. They've done very well at hinting at that, but without really giving you anything to go on. And so they could pull a twist or two, because somehow the Israelis are caught up in this multifaceted storyline this year, so it wouldn't surprise me if they either, at some point Saul thinks it was them that was behind it, but it turns out it wasn't, it was actually Dara Dahl or whatever. Something like that is probably in the mix for what's coming in the next few episodes. But why would they do this? I find this is what I can't really wrap my head around, because they don't really want people looking into WTC 93. Do they? Or maybe they do, Nat. Maybe
I don't know. It's been enough time.
Well, and the notion of there being some kind of controversy around that, and the notion of people looking at the FBI and going, hang on, did they sack their informant and accidentally let this happen, or did they deliberately let this happen or something? Because that's also been sewn into this series, right?
Oh,
that's
definitely.
That's kind of how they've been set up afterwards. That's how this FBI guy, who's now dead.
Right. And I was just starting to like him.
Yeah, just at the point when he was starting to become something of a good guy and actually uncovering some cool stuff. They kill him off, and that's kind of disappointing.
Yeah, and I could have done like maybe one more episode. I like the idea of him and Carrie kind of like teaming up and sort of running their own operations and things. I'm thinking that a lot of what they're trying to do in this season is something that we've seen time and time again as you and I have looked at the impact that the CIA has had in Hollywood films. This is the classic CIA-sponsored production where it's about getting rid of the bad apples within the CIA. Now, obviously, that's Kerry's sort of mission. It's revealed that she is in fact an advisor, or the top advisor to the president-elect, and she's all about reformatting the CIA and completely revamping everything about it, and they've got to overhaul, and they've got to change it, they've got to make it this better organization. And perhaps I have a feeling that the storyline we're going to see is that Dar Adal is kind of running his own show, and he's completely removed from what the CIA is really supposed to be doing. And he's obsessed with running his own crazy operations for his own political ends, and that ultimately the agency is a good thing. Kerry is still up front like, no, we're good. We're necessary. You want us to be here. We just have to be, we need someone at the helm who's really a good guy. Dar Adal is not that person. So maybe this is sort of, again, about...
Well, and they have, certainly in the latest episode, they've gone to some lengths to try and set up some kind of conflict between Dar Adal and Saul, because Saul doesn't know what's going on here. He's clearly not part of this operation, assuming Dar Adal is. That whatever Dar Adal is up to, Saul has been not told about it.
Right.
So, there again, you have the good CIA versus the bad CIA.
Yes.
If you like. And so maybe this is all about, once again, elevating Saul as the wise old spook with the fair, rational, balanced head versus the kind of rogue, psychotic, violent Dar Adal, which is something they've kind of played with back and forth, and their relationship has changed quite a lot over the seasons. So, yeah, just as Carrie is kind of a metaphor for the good CIA, or she's more like a cheerleader at this point, because now she's completely left the agency. She's, but she's still, at least in secret with the president-elect, kind of saying, yeah, all of this, we need all of this, we just need to do it better and do it sort of in a more just way. Whereas Saul is still on the inside of the CIA, he's the one I guess we're still supposed to identify with and see as the authority in the program, because Carrie is still a bit mental. So yeah, I guess that's the way it would break down. Dar Adal is the bad CIA, Saul is the good CIA, Carrie is the cheerleader. How this all fits in with WTC 93, I guess, the CIA's Inspector General did say that this was some kind of blowback, right? This was reported, I think, in the Boston Herald. We've never actually seen the report itself. I haven't been able to get a copy of it, but that is apparently what it says. So there again, you have this very ambiguous portrait of the CIA where, sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes the bad apples do something crazy and people wind up dead. So they're kind of, it's not like the CIA have ever really shied away from that portrayal of themselves in the productions that they've sponsored. They've always had an element of lethal black operations. It's just, how do we interpret them? How are we encouraged to interpret them?
And I suppose, too, on some level, the notion that the CIA sort of lost control of their operation, lost control of whatever Operation Cyclone was supposed to mean to the public. And, yeah, we sort of funded some of the wrong guys, but, and really it was the Pakistanis. We didn't keep them on a tight leash, and they funded the wrong guys, and that we were sort of giving money to, and that, lo and behold, sort of led to Al-Qaeda, but we never really, it was the Pakistanis and blah, blah, blah. But they've sort of put that out there. I mean, that's not entirely, that's even a mainstream concept. You'll even see people today saying, Obama and Hillary helped to create ISIS. And yes, right. I mean, yes, they did. And I guess I'm bringing that up only in that that's become acceptable on mainstream media to sort of say that, or even mainstream politicians. Whereas, can you imagine 10 10 years ago, if people were saying, can you imagine if there was, George Bush created, Al-Qaeda, or Ronald Reagan helped to create Al-Qaeda. You'd never get away with that.
There was that guy at the 9/11 Commission hearings who stood up and said that.
Yes, of course.
And was promptly dragged out of the room. But, aside from things like that, the angry nut in the crowd, no one really talked like that, certainly not in the mainstream media at that point in time. So now it is somewhat more acceptable. And going back to what you were saying before about, the death of the Blind Sheikh and this kind of, representing one of the final nails in the coffin of Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda is a brand, at least as the enemy in the war on terror, at least as that brand, is over. That phase is now kaput, it seems. We guess, anyway. Time will tell, but, at this point, that's what it looks like. And so, I guess the whole story of Al-Qaeda is now somewhat less sensitive, because we are no longer fighting them in an active sense. They are no longer the current enemy. Pop culture can treat them differently, and hence propaganda can treat them differently. So maybe that's what we're getting, is that the sort of dirty war version of Al-Qaeda, where they're hanging a little bit out to dry, but it's, as all of these things always are, a sort of limited hangout in cultural form. Maybe that's where they're going with it. Air a little bit of the dirty laundry, but nothing that anyone would actually piece together and say, hang on, so what are you doing now?
No, it does seem, it seems also sort of like, I don't know, like they're acting as sort of like a fluffer to the semi-intellectual viewer in saying that, yes, we did at times sort of do this, and you can have a little moral superiority knowing that we were kind of involved with this, but it never really got out of hand. And as you said, don't go too far beyond that. It's okay to say that we might have made some mistakes and we need to be reformed. Ultimately, that's really what I think this season is about. It's about showing that the reformed, wonderful CIA. Interesting in this, Saul, the good guy, the good CIA, is working with the Russians. That's okay. And the Iranians. That's all fine.
And sort of with the Israelis a bit.
Yes. Yeah. Right. That's all cool. The real enemy seems to be the Dar-Adals, the darker, nastier people within the agency that need to be purged. Again, reminds me of something like The Recruit. And again, in this the last Sunday's episode, we hear Saul say, quote, "the farm."
No, I know what you mean. When you look at The Recruit, and this is how CIA propaganda differs so greatly from the Pentagon's propaganda, and I think there's a dozen different major reasons why that is, but this is fundamentally the difference. The Pentagon does not like anything that makes them look in any way corrupt or bad. The CIA kind of relishes that and actually quite enjoys it, it seems. It quite enjoys having this reputation as this dark, powerful force in the world. And
yes,
I mean, the problem with this season is that we don't really have any enemy yet. Because we know that Seku's basically innocent. And Seku was quite a likable character. We weren't in any way predisposed to sort of dislike or distrust this guy. We might have just thought he was a bit noisy and a bit crazy, but so were a lot of people. So it's very hard to see what they're saying the enemy is. And maybe in some ways that's actually what they're doing differently this season. And to some extent last season, I guess, you didn't have a formal, distinct enemy in the same way as you had Haqqani and other people in previous seasons. Is that they're saying kind of the enemy is just the complexities of the world.
Yeah.
It's just that the world is such a difficult place. Sooner or later, you need a CIA, and the sad part of that is sooner or later, if you have a CIA, you're going to get some bad apples. And it's just, that's the way of the world, basically. Rather than saying this is all a good thing, or this is all something you should be supportive of, it's an inevitability.
Mm. Well, right. Maybe we'll see them sort of. There might be a moment where Dar kind of says, "Well, yeah, of course I fucked up. Of course I've made deals with all these horrible people, but hindsight is great, but at the time we had to do that. And you need me. You need people like that. Or else these organizations aren't going to survive. I mean, that's what's so comical with Carrie, that she believes that a clandestine covert organization built on secrets and lies is somehow going to be good in the world. That somehow that's necessary for a functioning democracy or whatever. The nation needs this sort of organization to exist is so I mean, I just don't really get quite what the hell Carrie thinks with that, but she does.
Well,
and
I guess if we go back all the way to season 1, it is kind of explained in as much as Carrie's clearly suffering from some massive case of PTSD following 9/11. That's sort of how she's introduced as a character, is someone who's just sort of rabidly, got to get the terrorists, got to get the terrorists.
Right.
Also,
I missed something.
Yeah. So they have kind of set that up, that that's her worldview. But then they've contradicted that in several of the seasons since then. And it seems
completely.
that all of these massive realizations she's had along the way have kind of gone to one side, and now she's back in the world of, we just need a slightly cleaner, nicer CIA.
Right, yeah. Yeah, we don't sell drugs and oppression and, jihadis and stuff.
Drugs have never come into this series, have they?
I don't think, I mean, I hate saying it, but only, with Brody and his medicine.
Don't go down. No, we're not talking about that anymore.
No, drugs have not factored in at all, which is, I don't think that's really curious. I think that's that's one of the few things that you can't really talk about with the CIA sponsored cinema.
Certainly not in a present tense kind of a way.
No. But even in even looking back on other, it's always, or it has to be a rogue element, But even that, it's always the rogue military element. That's, you can look like American Gangster or something. It's not some rogue CIA operative. It's a rogue, some military guy that's giving him
some guy in the Air Force who's been bought off or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe the Air America movie, kind of. But in that they don't even know that they're shipping drugs, right?
Most of the time, no, it seems not. So. So yeah. I mean, I guess that's where they're probably going with more of this kind of propaganda, and certainly in a TV series like this, where everyone's constantly switching sides anyway. There's lots of internal conflicts and drama about the conflicts between the people. That the notion of having, a good guy and a bad guy that are clearly definable, for one thing, it doesn't really work that well in cinema anymore, let alone in a protracted TV series, let alone in the 6th season of a protracted TV series. So I think it's also about adapting to the popular formats of the day, because this is where television is going. And to be honest, this is the kind of the best televisual art that there is out there, is this format, the longer form drama. It's better than cinema in most cases. So in adapting to that, you've got to have a more complex storyline for one thing, and that means your propaganda has to be more complex. And like I say, I think this is probably just symptomatic of the CIA embracing that and saying, well, okay, if we can't just have the CIA be the good guys like they are in The Agency, if you've ever seen that, that's such a sort of basic pro-CIA sponsored TV series.
Or 24.
Even there, the CIA are pretty much great throughout. You can't really, it doesn't really work that well anymore. So now what you've got to say is that the FBI are incompetent and corrupt, which they are. Don't get me wrong. But it does seem like the CIA quite like shitting on the FBI. So it's not that surprising to see them do it in televisual form, is it? That, there are these lesser agencies, but you can't really trust them. They're not trustworthy. They're not competent. They're not really doing their job properly. So there again, the implication is the CIA is just a necessity and an inevitability in the world. And I assume That's where they're going with this. But you're right, there's going to be some big confrontation at some point between Saul and Dar Adal. And I'm guessing that's where we're going to get the real logic of this season being spelt out for us. But until we actually see that, I don't know if I could assess where this season is going or what it is really that they're trying to say.
Yeah. But, I will say though, this is, turning out to be my favorite season thus far. I think that, again too, yes, this is a CIA propaganda, but it's so well done. And it's also, I think that as you rightfully pointed out, the enemy in this is the complexities of the world. The moral quandaries that one enters into when you're dealing with the deep politics, geopolitics,
let alone just random criminal violence that's
right, exactly.
People.
Yeah. It's a minefield. There is, and I think it's, I don't know, credit to the CIA advisors on this. It's not black and white. It never is, and this season is definitely kind of illustrating that more and more. I think that I'm sure there will be a moment in this season where Saul is totally right and justified, Dar Adal is totally right and justified, Carrie will be totally right and justified, and then at other times they'll all be completely wrong. They'll all be losing. I mean, it's like the one guy that's sort of, right on all this is Quinn, who's just a complete mess at this point. And I do hope that they, bring in, the Alex Jones character a bit more, throughout the season, although he might just have been like a one-off. But, Tom, I know, you probably want to get going. If you want to stay, of course, you're more than welcome to. But if not, any kind of final thoughts you have for Homeland, the Blind Sheikh, WTC 93, what do you think where do you think might be coming out of this? Because again, the closeness, we've got the anniversary of the bombing. We've got the Blind Sheikh dying, and on Sunday, this past Sunday, we had the Academy Awards handing over the best documentary award to the White Helmets, which is the moderate Al-Qaeda faction. So what do you think is going to be happening moving forward with all of this?
That's a virtually impossible question to answer, but well, I guess, the only kind of closing comment I can really offer to people is that WTC 93 is, to my mind, the most fascinating of all the terrorism cases that I've ever looked at, partly because it's so kind of misunderstood and because it's so kind of gone under the radar. So I really do encourage people to look into that more, because that's where so much of this begins, and so much of this makes a lot more sense now after 20 years or more. You can find out more about these things and kind of get a better shape of it and figure more out. In terms of where this is going, kind of like we were saying before, I think the Al-Qaeda brand is dead as an enemy faction, and they now seem to be somewhat reforming them into, I guess, the good Islamic terrorists. But they've done that before with the Kosovo Liberation Army, and some other various crazy factions along the way have been kind of praised and been, these are the good rebels and all the rest of it. So I guess they're going that way with it. But at the same time, ISIS seems to be a dead duck.
Yeah, I know.
Seems to be talking that much about them anymore. They don't seem to really be on the radar for the so-called new administration. Although what is on the agenda apart from Donald Trump losing his shit on a regular basis? So it's difficult to say in terms of where the White House are going with this, because they are such an unpredictable entity right now. But in terms of like the overall trajectory of the war on terror, I guess we're going to have to see something new, some kind of new gang or new faction or aspect to this, possibly just a new country to focus on. Because they're going to have to try and reform this story somehow, because at the moment it isn't working that well for them. I know they're still carrying on the drone strikes and the special forces raids and all of the rest of the horror, but from a public point of view, I don't think people are buying it right now. I don't think people are thinking, yeah, ISIS, got to go after ISIS. I mean, there's some people who think like that, but certainly not. I don't think a majority are feeling like that at all. So, yeah.
And I don't think the big enemy is China. We're not going to war with China anytime soon.
Certainly hope not.
In spite of what some people may want, maybe Iran. Curiously, though, in Homeland, the Iranians aren't really the bad guys in this.
It looked for a moment like they were going to be, but no, they've completely reversed that in classic Homeland fashion. And they've even brought back Javadi.
So great.
A character that we've been wondering what happened to him for like 3 years now. But that can be my only prediction, that something has to shift, because right now the war on terror narrative just sort of seems to be falling apart left, right and center. They seem to be trying to reform one part of it that only a few years ago was the absolute, the worst of the worst, but their current worst of the worst isn't doing the job for them anymore.
Yeah.
So, they're not going to give up on the war on terror, I think that's for sure. So I think they're just going to have to remix this thing once again, and I hate to say it, but we're probably going to see some violence in the West as a result. I don't want to say where or whatever, but something like that I can see maybe being on the horizon, because the political narrative isn't working for them right now.
No, absolutely. And I've been saying that on the show for since the beginning of the year, and I know it's like a horrible thing to say, and people criticize, say, oh, it's awful, don't say that. But, I mean, it feels as if we're due some sort of event only because we don't have an enemy. And that's never good for the CIA and the Pentagon and FBI and all. They need an enemy. We need a large boogeyman, especially since, the war state has sort of become so all-encompassing. Tom, I assume you probably want to get going. So thanks for joining me, buddy. Again, tell people, for anybody that doesn't know, we get new listeners all the time. Where can people go to find all of your work?
Well, I mean, the site that I'm running right now obviously will link up to some of the investigating the terror stuff that I did a few years ago, but the site that I'm really working on right now is spyculture.com. Excellent.
And people can go there, and lots of great articles, Tom's podcast, Clandestine, and of course, if you want to support Tom, you can become a subscriber on Patreon as well, correct?
Yeah, of course. If you just look at the big orange links, you'll spot them on spyculture.com. They're all over the place. Just click on those, and you can go to my Patreon if you are so inclined, and please do.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Tom, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. This has been a good chat. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we will be talking with Tom very soon again, I believe, because we, of course, have to discuss Homeland and lots of other stuff that Tom and I are working on. But just kind of wanted to finish up a little bit some of the things that we were talking about there. And I mentioned, of course, we have like the white helmets. That's this group. I'm sure everyone out there is probably kind of familiar with them, but they are this like basically moderate Al-Qaeda, not even moderate. I mean, they hang out with some of the nastiest Al-Qaeda factions in Syria. There's pictures of them marching around with people who have beheaded children and things of that nature, and they just won an Academy Award. So obviously the rebranding of Al-Qaeda or the attempt at making it look like this sort of moderate force, I think, is going to increase. And again, we were mentioning before, we've got the death of the Blind Sheikh, so that's definitely one of the sort of nails in the coffin for Al-Qaeda. The only character that's really still out there of any significance is, of course, Ayman al-Zawahiri. And I think as long as Zawahiri exists, or at least as long as he's allowed to exist, he will, Al-Qaeda won't be completely dead. There will always be, there will always be people out there who, myself included, say, but what about Zawahiri? Zawahiri's still out there. We massacred and butchered millions of people in Afghanistan and Iraq, Yemen, Somalia, Nigeria, Syria, all these places to get bin Laden, these other guys, but we still couldn't get Zawahiri. So until Zawahiri is dead, I think Al-Qaeda will always sort of exist on some level, and perhaps that's the way they want it to function. That if we need to, we can always kind of harken back to that. But sort of along with what Tom was saying in terms of we need this new enemy, or we need some sort of catalyzing event to steal a line from the neocons. I do think that is sort of in the cards. That is sort of out there, it's a very scary sort of environment to be in. When there is no sort of overt enemy at the moment, because I think that allows for groups like the CIA and the Special Forces and the Pentagon, military intelligence, all of the FBI, all these various organizations to begin kind of running all sorts of crazy operations, because they need to now they've got to build up something. So definitely something to look at. And again, really encourage people to go back and look at WTC 93, because as Tom said, it's sort of overlooked. 9/11 is very much, that's the popular, I hate saying that, but popular event to focus on. Whereas 93, that's the roots of everything. And I think because it took place at a time before the advent of the sort of large scale internet media, large scale alternative media, when it was still, people still read newspapers, like physical newspapers back then. Information didn't travel quite as fast as it does, right now. Many of the things that were going on in and around, say like the Al-Farooq Mosque, or with the Blind Sheikh or Ali Muhammad, were fairly brazen. They were fairly open about some of the stuff that they were doing. They didn't go through some of the lengths to hide it. So as you look into it, you can really start to see patterns. You can start to see very fascinating behavior. As I said too, this whole notion that because I've seen this floated around, and I might have even sort of mentioned it before, but the idea that the FBI is just creating crime, or creating these almost like in Minority Report, like it's a pre-crime sort of a unit. That's not new. That's not something that's only happened after 9/11. It's clearly back then, with the 93 bombing that was going on, clearly with the Oklahoma City bombing, that was, very deep operations into all of that. And hopefully we'll be covering the Oklahoma City bombing on the show soon. Cause that's the other sort of big, that was like, before I ever got into 9/11 and things of that nature, Oklahoma City bombing, the OKC bombing was always one that sort of, that even, when I was in, high school and college, before I was, quote, awake to all this, that didn't make any sense to me. But, anyway, now I'm just kind of, rambling on. It sucks. I really wanted to just kind of, egg Tom on to stay, but, it is pretty late over there, in England, and, Tom doesn't like to stay up too late, but, we ended on such a great note there. So maybe we'll just kind of, leave that in terms of, the things that we were talking about, and just sort of encourage you all to go and check this stuff out. And kind of, do some of your own sort of, research or thinking on this, because, as we were saying, there has to be something else coming on the horizon. I assume it's going to be some form of jihadi terrorism. I don't necessarily see it being like neo-Nazi right-wing terrorism. That doesn't really seem to be in the cards. And I don't know if if it's going to be like a nation state. I know that seems to be kind of being floated out there. Like, instance, I mean, like General Flynn, we're putting Iran on notice, and then he is, kicked out the back door. I don't know if there's necessarily like a link between that. And full disclosure, I don't think this is the deep state that was involved in this. And I think I mentioned on the last episode, I don't really I've been overusing that term. You'll notice in this episode, Tom and I said deep politics, not deep state, and there is a difference to all of that. I think actually deep politics is a better euphemism for what's going on here, because the deep state is almost like an organization, whereas deep politics is very much the sort of how that organization runs its operation. So I think that's a better term here. But all of that aside, there has to be something new. And I've stated this before. That's what's so scary with, say, your Donald Trump's, is that he's not really going to care. He doesn't really seem to be aware of anything that's going on. And curiously enough, it's been fairly kind of quiet. We're not really, internationally, not that much going on, at least that we know of. It's not as if stuff in Syria is sort of popping off, for lack of a better phrase. Yemen, it's all quiet over there. Saudi Arabia is keeping a lid on all of that. I can't really think of another hotspot, although we do have places like North Korea. And I do want to do at some point this talk about, or I'd love to find a guest to discuss what's going on with North Korea. And obviously the assassination of Kim Jong-nam, just crazy. I mean, now they're saying this was done with VX gas, which I didn't even think you could. I didn't think you could use that in I guess it was like a liquid in the liquid form or whatever, which I believe is sort of oily. And that's why the two different women approached him. I think one, you need to mix VX or something to get the desired outcome. So that's why the two women sprayed him or touched him with a cloth or with their hands. And the two women reportedly were also injured or were poisoned. They're alive, but they were, they didn't get VX poisoning or whatever. We do have those that's that going on the geopolitical stage. God only knows what's really going on there. I was just listening before I went on the air with Tom to the John Batchelor show, and John Batchelor. I enjoy the John Batchelor show. It is, you're kind of typical conservative, more right-wingish news show here in New York. I think it starts at 11 or midnight and goes to like 2 in the morning. But John Batchelor has pretty good guests on a lot of the time, although they are obviously, of the right-wing sort of ilk. But he always has on Gordon Chang, who's a complete, utter psycho. Used to write for Forbes. Now I think he writes for the Daily Beast. Super big China hawk, wants to nuke North Korea. He's like up there with that sort of stuff. And he's, predicting this is the end. There's massive stuff going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of in North Korea, and the regime is about to fall. We've got to pick up the pieces. We've got to strike them now while the iron's hot and obliterate the Kim family off the face of the earth. So we can avert, it was really funny. He was on the show, the John Batchelor show, that just last night, I suppose. And, him and Batchelor were speaking about this. And the two of them, it came with this crazy mental gymnastics here. They were saying, it's so disgusting, and so uncalled for to use a weapon of mass destruction to just kill one person. So if you use a weapon of mass destruction to kill one person, that's the most heinous crime on the planet. Now I get it. VX gas, probably overkill. Think a bullet in the back of the head or any other kind of poison, polonium or something like that. You could have gotten the job done. VX seems like overkill. There's also questions about where they even got it, because I don't believe North Korea is one of the countries that does possess VX. I know the Syria, the U.S., Russia. I think there's maybe China as well. I'm not sure, but I don't believe that North Korea, we've known previously, has VX gas. So they either made it or they got it from somewhere. But that's the worst thing. So heinous to use a weapon of mass destruction. So what? If you use a weapon of mass destruction to obliterate 1 million people, that's okay. It's sort of crazy rhetoric, and I see that more and more. Don't know quite what to make of it. I will try and cover something to do with North Korea and what's going on there. If nothing else, it's just fascinating because we really actually have no idea what's going on there. And don't listen to any of these quote experts on North Korea. Nobody really has a good grasp on what's going on inside the hermit country. I don't really buy any of the reports or stuff that the press gets their hands on from South Korean intelligence. I'm sure some of it's real, but if South Korea knows what's going on, which I assume they probably have a pretty good idea, they're not releasing that to the media. We hear all of these sort of crazy. That's the thing. We know so little about what really goes on in North Korea that anything you say, they totally believe. So recently, Kim Jong-un is alleged to have killed someone that was once close to him, that I think was allegedly, again, close to Kim Jong-nam, who is really just coming out of this whole thing smelling like roses. Not that he was a nasty person, but he's just he was not the sort of, I don't know, the Martin Luther King of North Korea. But supposedly Kim Jong-un killed some general or whatever a few days ago with from a jet, like a jet flew in or anti-aircraft artillery was shot at him. Who knows? Who has any fucking clue if this is at all real? It's like the stories that he feeds his detractors to dogs. I mean, where does that really come from? Do we actually have any source on any of this? This is again, we had Dennis Rodman of all people, basically sending a message to Obama that Kim Jong-un wanted to talk, or that he was willing to talk, and that was just poo-pooed. We don't want to, he's going to feed everybody to the dogs. End of story. So I don't know quite what's going on with North Korea. I have been following it somewhat though, just because it's so bizarre. And of course, the China hawks, the North Korea hawks out there love to use these events as an excuse to push for more war, for larger military spending. We've got to send the Navy out to the South China Sea. We've got to start regime change operations. I mean, again, think about it. The CIA went through the trouble of dropping copies of The Interview into North Korea in the hopes that piece of shit movie with Seth Rogen and just the biggest scumbag on the planet, James Franco, would somehow make them overthrow the government. So crazy and so bizarre. But anyway, I am getting up towards the end of today's show, and I'm just totally going off on some tangents here. But I did want to say thank you to everybody on Patreon for subscribing to my Patreon account or campaign. And thank you all so much to all of you out there for either $1 or $3 or $5. We just got a donation the other day for $6. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And I'd like to thank Frank and Raymond, who just signed up to become subscribers on Patreon. And also to let everybody know that if you are a subscriber at the $5 level, there is a new bonus podcast out there. So if you go to Patreon, it should be the first it should show up first on my Patreon page for the subscriber-only podcast. I talk about what I do to relax and unwind and unplug from the alternative media. So I talk about my love of professional cycling, of watching cycling, and also my love of watching anime. And two things that are near and dear to my heart, and they're two things that I use quite a bit to unwind from all that. So if you're interested in hearing that, or of course hearing some of the other episodes that I do, some of them are personal, some of them we have a guest. Hopefully we will be having some more guests on the bonus podcasts. But I do like doing the kind of personal ones. I hope people enjoy those and you know, get something out of hearing a little bit about myself away from all the stuff in the alt media. Because I think that's important as well. So definitely that to look forward to. People, they keep bugging me about Porkins' great game. I know, believe me, I want to do an episode. Christoph wants to do an episode. We've just had a lot of scheduling problems. Christoph is working on some school stuff right now. You know, and when we started the show, we always said our, you know, personal lives and the stuff that we're working on outside of this always comes first. Christoph is finishing up school. He's doing a ton of work to get all of that done. And if you listen to our podcast or you read Christoph's work, you know this guy works really, really fucking hard. So stop bugging him and me about it. I will be doing an update episode on Porkins' great game, talking a little bit about, you know, the long wait and stuff, and a little bit more on that. And I think I'll also probably do like in that episode, a short little kind of update on stuff going on in Central Asia. Of course, me and Christoph are still following all of the developments in Central Asia, the Caucasus, and the global war on terror. You know, we just don't always have time to record an episode, but we will. I mean, I'm not going to say it's this month because I don't really know, but I'm hoping by you know, end of March. We will be able to get a new episode out, but until then, just trust us. You know, we're gonna do it. It's just gonna take a little bit of time, and that, of course, is why if you sign up to be a Patreon subscriber to Porkins' Great Game, you're only charged when we do an episode. That was another thing that Christoph and I decided when we started the Patreon. We were only going to charge people when we did an episode because we knew we weren't going to be able to do an episode all of the time. So just something to keep in mind. Some other little things, some interesting stuff going on O.J. Simpson-wise. I will probably have Brian Heiss on to discuss that. There are rumors floating around that O.J. might be released from prison. Of course, the Goldman family is not very happy about that, and there's been this sort of concerted campaign in the media to you know, to talk about what a menace OJ is. He should never be allowed. He should rot and die in prison. So we'll have Brian Heiss on to kind of parse through that. Maybe that'll be a subscriber only show. And just one other thing, I spoke about this in the past two episodes. This little Trump troll, Mike Cernovich, I'm sure all of you out there listening are familiar with this guy. And this is a guy who has said that, you know, trolling is great, and we should troll people, you know, for political ends and things like that. And he's talking about the benefits of trolling. So if you want to, everyone out there, troll Mike Cernovich and ask him, because you won't give me an answer on Twitter. I'm going to try and figure out another way to contact him. Ask him, who is he referring to when he said the quote, "accused madam is shook"? Go back and listen to some of the previous episodes, and you'll understand a little bit more about that. But ask him about that. Ask him about Alan Dershowitz and the case that he's involved with. But anyway, until then, I will be talking to you all very soon.
News and information you can trust. This is American Freedom Radio. Freedom, American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me. American Freedom Radio. Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys, because they have all the technology, they have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Nutritious food is real body arms fat, improves digestion, and feeds the entire body the nutrients it needs. Did you know the U.S. government banned the hemp plant from growing in the United States and classified it as a Schedule I drug to hide it behind the marijuana plant? People have been confused about this plant for over 80 years, and many still don't know what hemp is. So now you know hemp is not marijuana, and marijuana is not hemp. They are different varieties of the same species. HempUSA.org wants the world to know these basic facts and to help people understand that hemp protein powder is the best kept health secret you need to know about. Remember, hemp protein powder contains 53% protein, is gluten-free, anti-inflammatory, non-GMO, and is loaded with nutrients. Call 888-910-4367, 888-910-4367, and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.